meeting for Colerain Township. If everyone would please stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We ask that everyone, if you would please turn off your cell phones, electronic devices, and so on and so forth. And commission members and staff, if you will make sure that your microphones are on. Before we begin our agenda this evening, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce a new person to us, and that's our new zoning director, Mr. Mike Iona. Mr. Iona?
Thank you, and good evening. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. So, okay, let us move on. We need to consider the minutes from October 15th, 2019 meeting. Are there any changes, additions, or deletions to those minutes?
Roll call.
We need a Al.
Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Roll call. I'm ahead of myself. May we have a roll call?
Mr. Faring.
Here.
Ms. McMullen.
Here.
Mrs. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Westfall.
Here.
Mr. Grody.
Here. Okay, now let's go on to the approval of the minutes from October 15th. Are there any changes, deletions, or additions? Hearing none, can we have a motion, please?
So move. I'll second that.
Okay. May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Faring.
Yes.
Ms. McMullen.
Yes.
Mrs. Smith.
I recuse myself.
Mr. Westfall. Mr. Grody.
Yes. The next item on the agenda is the public address portion of our meeting. This is the portion of the meeting where anybody present this evening would like to address the commission on any item that is not on the agenda. So do we have anyone who would like to address the commission on a topic different than what's on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. Permit me to comment. We're first of all glad that you're coming, expressing an interest in the goings-on of the Zoning Commission. But please be aware that the only persons who will be permitted to talk at a given time are those that are recognized by the chair and who are at the podium. Those of you who have signed up to speak, you will be given ample opportunity to speak when it is appropriate time. So please bear with us on that, and we'll work through our agenda very easily. Any final development plans this evening, Mr. Kaler?
No, there's not.
Okay. The next one is a public hearing for case ZA 2019-06, Abbeytown Subdivision, and this is a request for a zone map amendment. And do we have a report from staff?
Yes, we do. This is a zoning map amendment from the category of R4 and R6, which are both single-family single-family districts, to PDR, which is Planned Development Residential. Planned developments are subject to preliminary development plans, which we're covering tonight, and a final development plan. Those are actually tied to the district designation. I put up here the purpose of the planned development, and I want to go through that real quick just so we know what the goal is for this, is to allow for flexibility in the zoning requirements where the result will be of a higher quality development. B is to provide for local suitable recreation facilities, open space, and other common facilities while preserving the existing landscape to the extent possible. And C is to encourage sound planning principles in the arrangement of buildings, the preservation of open space, the utilization of topography, and other site features. Also to obtain creative and coordinated designs in harmony with the surrounding uses, allow procedures supplemental to those applicable to other districts to establish under which development plans are particularly designed to meet the objectives of this section, and then lastly, to allow for the creative development that conforms with the goals and objectives set forth in the Township Comprehensive Plan. There are basically two ways to do a residential subdivision. I'm going through this because this commission, as a matter of fact, I think the last planned residential district that's gone through here was back in 2008, which was right about the housing downturn. So we have not seen one of these types of plans come through recently. We have had what's called standard subdivisions go through. And I'll describe the difference. The plan development that we're doing tonight, it's actually a zone change, so we receive an application with a development plan attached. We send notices to the surrounding property owners, advertise a public hearing for zoning commission, which is the purpose of tonight's meeting. This commission then reviews and makes a recommendation to our Township Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees will also hold a public hearing. We'll send notices to the surrounding property owners, and they will vote to approve with conditions, or deny the application. If it is approved, that actually changes the zoning designation on our zoning map to PDR from the existing. Then there is a second review by this commission. Like if this is approved tonight, you will be seeing this again probably in February or March as a final development plan. And that gives all of the details, things like detailed landscaping, lighting, architectural styles of houses, and all that kind of stuff. For tonight's meeting, we're recommending approval with conditions, and those conditions basically set up the expectation for what we're going to see in a final development plan in a few months. So is that kind of clear as to what tonight's process is? Standard subdivisions are ones that, unfortunately, under Ohio Revised Code, do not come under the purview of Colerain Township, either our zoning commission or the trustees. Those are done straight through the Hamilton County Regional Planning Commission. The Hamilton County Planning Commission makes a determination if all the lots meet our zoning requirements, if the streets are adequate and all of that. We are given a chance to comment on those plans, but they're voted on by the Regional Planning Commission, not our local. And we've had several subdivisions come through, not major ones, but that tends to be a typical way of doing subdivisions. So with that difference described, we'll move on to this particular proposal. This property is on the north side of Kemper Road. It's just west of Pippin. It is in an area that is agricultural. Across the street is the Crown Hill Cemetery and the water tower that you can see for miles. On Pippin Road is the Pleasant Run Schools. And we'll note that that school is within the mile radius. As a matter of fact, the next subdivision, even to the east of tonight's Abbeytown proposal, which is called Hunterston, that was done back in the early 2000s by Dries, I believe it was. Part of that subdivision is within a mile radius of Pleasant Run. The significance being that the school district no longer provides bus service to kids in that. So the kids within this neighborhood would be expected either their parents drop them off or they would have to walk to school. The key issue there being our focus on sidewalks. So that's the general location of the property. This is an aerial photograph. You can kind of see the green lines through there. That represents existing drainage swales. It drains basically from east to west on this property. Surrounding zoning classifications is R4 to the west, R5, which is a little denser, to the north, even more dense, R6 to the east. This is a street view of the site from Kemper Road. Kemper kind of bisects sort of a swale. I think it was built up some years ago. The site is a little bit hilly. Obviously, it's still suitable for tilling and farming. So it's just kind of gently rolling terrain. This is Kemper Road. This is taken from in front of the fire station, which is almost in front of this property looking west. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of shoulder. It's fairly narrow, typical kind of county rural roadway. And this is looking the other direction. We did note in the report they chose to have a driveway or the main entrance road pretty much where you would be standing taking this photograph into the site because of that crest in the hill. There's more visibility the farther down the hill that you get. Another site photograph. This is looking up towards Kemper Road. You can barely see the utility lines on Kemper Road with some vegetation that follows that roadway. This is looking west from the eastern side of the property. Another view. This is looking north through the site. There's a church that's adjacent to the property that we'll see on the plan, Lutheran Church. That's another view of the church. This is a previous subdivision. It was approved about 2005, more than 10 years ago. This went through the Regional Planning Commission as a standard subdivision and was approved. It contained fewer lots than what is being proposed tonight, but it did not have much open space. The area that's shown in green was a slightly less than 1 acre parcel that was set aside for stormwater detention. I don't remember if it was detention or retention basin for the property. That's pretty much the low end of the drainage for this site. This particular development did have more lineal feet of street. It also included a driveway that came off, or the main road came off at Pippin Road. And after this development did not go through, that property was transferred to the church, which is just north on Pippin Road. And this is the development plan, the subject to tonight's meeting. This has about 8 acres of open space incorporated with it, stormwater detention basins or retention basins in about the same location as the previous proposal. It shows the main drive coming off of Kemper Road. Just to do a quick comparison of the last development, it was called Slonica Reserve. Their minimum lot size was 14,000 square feet. Abbeytown, the average is about 10,318. Might be slightly larger on that average. The minimum lot widths were larger. The front yard setbacks were larger. This particular proposal has much more open space, more than 8 times the open space. Under a standard subdivision, there is no requirement for perimeter buffering. This particular proposal does show perimeter buffering where it's needed. The number of lots within the 29 acres of the Slonica Reserve, which is in tonight's proposal, was 57. Abbeytown has 68. Lineal feet of street, the Slonica had 3,150 lineal feet of street. This has about 2,880. That's a reduction of 270 feet. And this kind of speaks to the efficiency issue with doing a planned development. The goal is to try to make more efficient use of the land than just a standard kind of what we call cookie cutter subdivision. By reducing the lineal feet of street, it reduces township expense for snow plowing, for maintenance. It's less water lines, less sewer lines, gas, electric, the whole gamut, for basically the same amount of lots. Architectural standards with Slonica Reserve, there is no requirement for architectural standards. With Abbeytown, they are suggesting that they will have some minimum levels of architectural standards that I'll review in the conditions. This is a comparison of current zoning and proposed standards. This came straight from your staff report, so I'm not going to really go into this in detail unless you have questions of it. If you average the area that's included in open space plus the area in lots, it comes out to about 15,743 square feet, which is larger than the individual lots in the previous Slonica Preserve. So the idea of allowing for common open space is that you can do things within that open space that you can't normally do on an individual lot. You can have recreational facilities, you can have area for wildlife, those types of things. You can't necessarily throw a football in a 8-acre lot, but you can on a common open space. So it allows for those types of things. This is the plan for the development again. They are proposing buffering again on the west border. We've had some conversations with surrounding property owners, and there was a concern expressed about the retention basin and a request that there be some sort of a physical barrier like a fence along that property line to separate it, especially if they have young children. They don't want to worry about people getting into the retention basin. So you'll see that in the recommendation. And then along the church property and property to the east, there's some additional buffering, as well as a street tree planting program. Again, in a standard subdivision, there's no requirement for street trees, but this is being proposed. There is a request for a reduction of front yard setback on certain lots, and that's in your report. And those lots are, if I get my pointer going, these lots along Kemper Road. The concern is that there's a fairly steep drop off of Kemper Road, and they would like to be able to avoid the hillside to move those houses 5 feet closer to the roadway coming in. Instead of being 30 feet throughout the subdivision, that just those lots have a 25-foot front yard setback to allow for a bit bigger backyard. This is a close-up of, this is some of the buffering that is being proposed at the church property that surrounds. And then this is going the wrong way on the west side. And this is the area that we're also suggesting that some sort of a fence be provided to supplement that landscaping and provide the separation to the detention basin. They're proposing some landscaping at the entry as a feature. That would have a entry sign monument like this and some landscaping that would surround it. And this is the development plan with the aerial put on top of it. All of this was in your packets in advance of the meeting. That gets us to our staff recommendation. Staff is recommending for approval of this subject to conditions. The first condition is that the front facade of all dwellings contain an element of stone, brick, or other masonry unit. Under standard zoning, again, they could do potentially entirely vinyl or some other materials that might not be as attractive as adding masonry. Condition number 2, that the minimum housing size be 1,400 square feet for a 1-story residential dwelling and 1,600 square feet for a 2-story residential dwelling. Number 3, that all homes feature a basement and that the basement not be considered as part of the floor area that we had talked about just in condition 2. Number 4 is that 2 additional evergreens be provided on the vegetative buffer along the west property line, just to give a little bit more screening for those adjacent property owners. Number 5, that fencing be provided along the west property line of the development, and that should be clarified. That's only intended to be in that area that's shown to have the landscape buffer, not the full west side of the property line. Number 6 is that the plan for the intent and treatment of the open space areas be included in the final development plan. Said plan shall address the manner in which the common open space will be developed or treated, which includes one or more of the following options: keeping it natural and maintained, provisions of a playground, provisions of a paved walking trail, provisions of planting and landscaping. And there may be other things that they want, but right now it's just generically labeled as open space, and we would like to see more information provided in terms of what the intent is of that space. Number 7, that a homeowners association be formed to manage for the care and the common open space, retention pond, fencing, and vegetative buffers. Number 8, the maintenance of vegetative buffers, fencing, and open space shown on the approved preliminary plan and final development plan be included and outlined in the HOA documents of the Abbeytown subdivision. Maintenance shall be conducted in a manner that promotes and fosters the intent of the buffer screen and new development from existing adjacent development. Number 9, that the street name other than New Bridge be selected to not duplicate another Colerain street. We do have a New Bridge Drive, which is a cul-de-sac. The concern was that New Bridge Court could be confused with that street, so we try not to do that. Number 10, that a street lighting district be set up for this development in accordance with the standards of Colerain Township. Number 11, that public sidewalks be provided on West Kemper Road and throughout the development. We do realize that there are some topographic issues, but we're hoping to get some creative engineers to come up with a design for a sidewalk that will connect the frontage of this property. Number 12, and I didn't show this in the first plan, there's a panhandle portion of the tract. And actually, I want to backtrack for just a moment to get to that, because I think I need to describe it. In this particular plan, you can see this strip of land. It's like what a flag lot would be. I believe that's only about 20 foot wide. That strip of land, if it is separated from this development, would not be considered a legal conforming lot. So we would not be able to just approve a lot split for that. It would need to be attached to another piece of property or just otherwise dealt with. Otherwise, the concern is it's going to be a no man's land. The question will be who maintains it, who pays the taxes, all those kinds of issues come up. So the requirement that I put in the conditions say that it be transferred to adjacent property owner. I guess I would say that is one option. If they come up with another option, we are just looking for some resolution to not orphan that piece of property and have it become a problem. And then lastly, the front yard minimum setbacks be 25 feet for lots 1 through 13 and 30 feet for the remaining lots. So those are the conditions. So basically, when a development plan, preliminary development plan is approved, the design of that is actually attached to that zoning designation. So all of the street trees that they're showing, the entry features and all that become basically a covenant within what's being approved for zoning purposes. So it's a little bit different from what we've seen in other things. Do you have any questions regarding procedure or the proposal?
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Taylor or staff there?
For number 4, will there be size for the evergreen trees established?
Yeah, we do have in our buffer standards, we do have minimum size for evergreen trees and for deciduous trees on planting. I don't recall, there's a height minimum on evergreen trees and,
It's a height and caliper regulation.
yeah.
That's
I know
pretty consistent.
caliper, it has to be 2.5-inch caliper for a deciduous tree, and I think it's 5 feet for an evergreen, but I can check that for you real quick.
Mr. Kaler, on item number 5, the fencing, even though the landscaping is only going to be put into part of the west property line, I'm understanding that this fencing would be the entire west property line.
No, that's what I need to clarify. The fencing, and we can retype that or just clarify. The intent is that it only be within the area that the buffer strip is located. There's really no need going further north because there's natural buffers, plus there's open space up there.
Then earlier in the material that was sent to us, it was referenced a wood rail type fence. Is that what I would call like a split rail fence?
Yes.
Okay. But that's open for final development?
Yeah, those kind of details come in the final development plan.
Okay.
The landscaping, they will submit a plan that shows all the tree sizes and species and those types of information.
Okay. Commissioners, any other questions or comments for staff?
I just have one now. Right now, it is under R4 zoning, right?
And a
Right now.
small part is R6.
Okay. So under that zoning that it sits at now, as long as they stayed with the rules of that zoning with the county, they wouldn't be in front of us.
Correct.
So going to PDR, we have a little more regulation on what it's going to look like.
Yes, absolutely.
And I do have a second question. So for the retention ponds, I went to the fire station and stood there and overlooked it on Sunday. And the retention ponds, where they're proposed, seem to be at a higher level than the 3 houses that are adjacent to the property. Are there any ways that we can guarantee that any of the water, if it does overflow at any point, that we have some type of assurance that the homeowners won't be financially burdened by having a retention pond that sits higher than the properties?
There's kind of 2 parts of that. This is the lowest point of this particular tract, so they really can't get any lower than where it's already proposed. The second part of that is, and that fell within that development review that I was going through, before they can get any permits to move dirt, to build streets, to build the retention pond, this all has to be reviewed by numerous county agencies, one of which is the Soil and Water Conservation. And they have design standards for how detention facilities are built. We do not, the township does not have jurisdiction over that. That's a county agency that reviews those. County engineer reviews the road improvements. This gets a little off, but the county engineer actually oversees the construction of the streets, construction of the sidewalks, drive aprons. All of that is through the county after the development plan's approved by us.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, again, any additional comments or questions for staff?
Just my last comment, I think the sidewalk will have to be very creative. It's a very steep drop off with that guardrail there too. That'll be a tough one.
We would agree. It's not a typical profile of a street, but if you looked at the drawings and with that guardrail and virtually no shoulder on the road, it's not a good walking environment currently. And we'd like to find a solution that makes it more walkable. It may even be having to do a sidewalk that diverges from the roadway. It may be something possibly even through the subdivision. But somehow there needs to be a pedestrian connection from end to end of that property on Kemper.
And then something that I didn't check while I was out there, is there a crosswalk at Kemper to get them across Kemper and to the correct side where the school's at?
On the west side. Oh, not on Kemper. There is on Pippin, at the intersection of Pippin and Kemper.
And that gets them, so they have to.
There's no
cross twice.
there's no sidewalk connection in front of either the fire station or the next property going up to Pippin. So there's some gaps to be filled along Kemper Road. The Hunterston subdivision, they have their complete sidewalks. That's just to the west. And then there's about a 600-foot gap. And then we have Abbeytown. So it's a matter of just compiling the pieces and making the connections that'll make this safe and walkable.
Okay, thank you.
I would take it that the applicant is present this evening, and if so, would you come forward and state your name and with whom you are affiliated, and would you please spell your last name for the record?
Yes, sir. Brad Austin with MI Homes in Cincinnati.
Excuse me,
And
Mr.
last
Chair,
name is-
before you guys begin,
I would ask that we
legal
go ahead and
counsel.
swear people in if they're going to provide testimony, include either the applicant.
Okay.
So anyone who would intend to provide testimony or input today, if you could please stand and raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you wanted to do that, but we'll move forward. Mr. Austin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, last name spelled Austing. Are you going to run the slides?
Which slides do you need? Oh, yes. Starting there.
So generally, we're in agreement with staff. So rather than repeat kind of what they've done and walked you through, I thought we'd start at least talking a little bit about us as a company and then kind of what we're projecting home-wise to build here. Next slide, please. So our company is founded in 1976 by the Schottenstein family. It's still run. CEO is Bobby Schottenstein. Out of Columbus is the headquarters. We are a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. Corporately, last year we built almost 6,000 homes. Gross revenues of $2.3 billion. We do have 209 active communities in 15 cities. So we're in 15 major markets. Locally, we started here in 1988. Last year we closed 334 homes with gross revenue around $108 million. We have been ranked several years in a row Builder of the Year in Cincinnati market. So been around for 40 years, over 120,000 homes built. Next slide, please. So part of that success over the years allows us really to offer one of the best warranties in the business, really unheard of to some degree. So 1 year, anything you're concerned about with your house, we'll come over and take care of it. 10 years on any construction defects. This is an industry leader, 15-year transferable structural warranty. So if you buy a house from us and want to sell in 5 years, you can sell that. When you sell your house, that warranty structure will go with the house. So we really stand by our product and treating our customers right. And of course, we back all the manufacturer's warranties that products we put in the house. Next slide, please. There's some questions about development oversight, and so first place we stop is here and ask for your approval, which we greatly appreciate. But then again, the Hamilton County engineer watches the checks and balances. We have our own, but then Hamilton County engineer, Public Works, Metropolitan Sewer District, OEPA, Duke Energy, and of course, when it comes down to building homes, the Hamilton County Building Inspections Department. So checks and balances, so people feel comfortable that things get done right. Next slide, please. We have 20 active communities in the Cincinnati market in southeast Dayton. You kind of see them there sprinkled about, all the stars. Next slide, please. Or quite honestly, we have not in recent history been in Colerain Township, so we're excited to be here. We think it's a great project, great use of the land. I think the very first slide that Marty showed was the purpose, and we're using the topo, trying to save natural features. You see a lot of wooded section there we're trying to preserve, so we're working with the land, and again, instead of trying to provide the green space and open common areas for everybody to use versus just having a gridded out lot pattern. So much more creative from a land use standpoint. Next slide, please. A little bit about the surrounding market and what we're doing. You'll see kind of we pulled average sales for the last 24 months kind of around us. So to the west, my pointer's not working, sales number 7, that's a subdivision, the former Dree subdivision. Average resales there were 273,000 thereabouts last 24 months. When you go directly north to us, average resales were 180,000 rounded. Directly to the east, 115,000, and then down to the southeast, about 175,000. The program we have here, you see in the middle on the land, we think the base price will start at 290, but we think the averages will come in somewhere between $325,000 and $350,000. Next slide, please. So the program and how we come to those assumptions, we're going to offer 10 plans here, but that's 40 elevations. Each house has a different elevation, each floor plan. And then also people pick their own materials and color selections, so you literally have hundreds of combinations of houses. So we want the streetscape to look broken up and customized to some extent. Again, our base price of $290, average of $325, $350 we're projecting. And then, of course, the commitment elements of brick and stone on the front. This program is also, we have a community called Kerrisdale in Mason, Ohio, currently going on. It's been very well received. And again, you can see the program there. Our base price there is $290. We're actually averaging $368,000 over the last year there. So that's kind of why we know this program works, and we think it'll work great here as well. Next slide, please. Just timeline for development. We're anticipating breaking ground in March of next year. That'll get the first bit of street on and paved by hopefully July. That means the first home can break ground around August, September, with the first closing hopefully December, January of next year. We projected sellout the last home closing in 2024. So that's the timeline. Next slide. And just want to thank you and welcome to Better. Looking forward to working with you folks, and I think it's an exciting community. Appreciate your support.
Okay.
Any questions?
Any questions from the commissioners? Okay, is there a thank you, sir.
Yes.
Is there a representative from the other applicants' representatives present that want to?
No, I've introduced my colleagues. Justin Lanham's here as well. And Scott Huber's with Abbeytown Engineers. He can answer any technical questions regarding stormwater and these types of questions as well. So, he's a civil engineer. So.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Well, hearing no other further questions of our applicant, I will need a motion to open the floor for public hearing, which is the time where those of you who have signed up can come forward and state whatever it is that you wish to state. So may I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay, may we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Faring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Grady.
Yes. Okay, we'll just work down the list. I see a first name is Michael Flam. Again, if you'd come forward, state your name, spell your last name, and then give us your address if you would, sir.
Good evening, my name is Mike Flam. It's F-L-A-M-M. I reside at 3120 West Kemper Road. And my property is adjacent to the MI proposal. I'm at the bottom of the hill, and I'm below the water. I've created a bit of a presentation. We have some photos. If you'd like to see those, I can.
Whatever you wish to pass out to us. Thank you. Thank you.
By way of introduction, I work for the city of Cincinnati. I'm a police officer, but most importantly, I'm actually a crash reconstructionist. I'm trained in diagrams, measurements, maps. I do work not only for the city of Cincinnati, but I also do work for Colerain Township as well. And that's going to lead in some of the diagrams and measurements that I took and some of the explanations that I have a little bit further into this into this proposal. MI Homes is proposing a change in the zoning of this property. I am wholly against the change of this zoning. I am not against properties being built. I'm not against subdivisions being built. I'm not against having neighbors. I am against the way that this has been brought onto us. To me, it comes off as a hard sales pitch. It's too dense. There are too many problems with this proposal. And I think that the zoning in whole should be denied. If they want to build a subdivision, they can build within the rules that currently exist. I'm not against MI Homes. I've had the opportunity to work with Mike Iona, with Mr. Austin. They've both been pleasant, but I do respectfully disagree with their presentation. The current land is undeveloped. Mr. Kohler had a representation of the land earlier in his presentation as slightly rolling. If you look at the map, you look at the topographical map, that land is not slightly rolling. There is almost a 100-foot change in elevation from the bottom to the top. That's not slightly rolling. The hill is steep. The 68 single-family homes that they proposed is too dense for that property. The current undeveloped land allows for rain to be dispersed, to be absorbed into the ground. It allows for a natural absorption. Part of their proposal is they're going to drain the rainwater into 2 retention ponds that are directly behind my property. I've included a diagram, which I'll point out in a few minutes, that shows that my elevation of my backyard, where my house is the same elevation as where they're proposing to drain these ponds. If you look at page 3, there's a photo out of my front yard. That is the current creek that they're proposing to drain all of this water into with 2 inches of rain. It happens every spring. It comes out of its banks regularly. Page 4 and page 5 have similar photos. That is the creek that they're proposing to drain. 2 inches of rainfall already does that. Now they're going to pipe an entire subdivision into that creek, into my backyard. They're going to flood my property. I'm not an engineer. I don't claim to be an engineer. But I also recognize that you don't have to be an engineer to understand that water rolls downhill. I'm at the bottom of the hill, and that is problematic. Page 7 shows a layout. 2 inlet pipes, proposed to be 24 inches to allow water into there. 2 exhaust pipes of 30 inches. Those exhaust pipes are pointed at my backyard at the same elevation as my house. This is poorly planned, poorly designed. This is unacceptable. I built that house myself with my wife 13 years ago. I raised my family there. Now, MI Homes wants to come in and say that this is a well-planned development. It is not. Excuse me. The current elevation located in that circle on page 7 is 780 feet. That line, as you see, goes into the back of my house. That shows you the elevation is the same. Now, I will say I appreciate Mr. Kohler's question. Ms. McMullen, you posed a question saying, is there a plan that can guarantee the property owners aren't damaged by this? Now, take note, there are 2 responses to that. One is, you can't get any lower. It's the lowest spot on the property, and he's true. That's true. Those 2 ponds are the lowest spot on this property that they're proposing. And the second one is that it has to be reviewed by engineers, has to go through a whole design process. But what he didn't answer was the question. What he didn't answer was, no, we can't make that guarantee. Because he knows he can't make that guarantee. Look in New Orleans. They have levees that weren't supposed to fail. We know otherwise now. We know otherwise. Quite frankly, there's too many houses in too small of an area. I'm not against MI Homes building back there. The proposed size of houses is too small. The land is too small. The property, too many properties, too small of an area. The other thing that I have concern with, they had a presentation slide up there showing they're planning the houses to start at $290. We expect the properties to sell for $325 to $350. A 1,700 square foot house on 0.17 acres, you can do the research yourself, it's not going to sell for $350,000. My question is, why is it being misled like this? Why are we being misled? This is unacceptable. If they say when they want to build a small house, that's fine. Don't mislead us and say otherwise. This is wholly irresponsible of them. Next, I want to point out some traffic safety concerns. This is really my wheelhouse. This is what I do for a living. I investigate fatal crashes for a living. I've done it now for 19 years. The public sidewalks, per the report from Mr. Kohler and Mr. Iona, request that there be sidewalks placed on the adjacent property on Kemper Road, West Kemper Road. And I like what Mr. Kohler said before. We can hope for creative engineering. Hope for creative engineering. That is not, we can put a sidewalk out there. We can hope for creative engineering. I'll help you with this. I've done a little math. Currently, there's a 25-foot drop off of Kemper Road. Off the side of Kemper Road where this proposed sidewalk is. 25-foot drop, and there's an open space proposed of 50 feet in length. There's guardrails on the side of Kemper Road, and the existing sidewalk next to the Hunterston subdivision is approximately 21 feet from the roadway. The zoning report says that it would be similar to this. To move a sidewalk off the side of Kemper Road, 20 feet, it's going to require a grade. There is currently right now a 50% grade. To move this sidewalk, they have to build the dirt all the way out. They have to regrade this. That regrading exceeds into the current backyards. So we no longer have 7,100 square foot pieces of property. 7,800 square feet of property. It's now reduced. So to do that, that's not an engineering feat. They can't do it and keep the same property sizes that they're recommending. The already small property sizes that they're recommending. They get even smaller putting this sidewalk in. There is no room for a proposed sidewalk along Kemper Road. The second, the proposed intersection, as we see here on the left side of this map. There's this concept that's called a point of possible perception. You as a driver, as you're driving down the road, there comes a point where you could see a hazard. You could see a hazard if you're looking for it, if you're paying attention to it. That is the point of possible perception. As you walk back up on Kemper Road peaks just west of the firehouse. This proposed entrance is coming down the hill. It's 50 miles an hour. Almost highway speeds. But we're going to put a sidewalk out there next to a guardrail and expect these children to walk to school. The point of possible perception is 630 feet away. It may seem like a far distance. However, on page 15, little explanation. At 50 miles an hour, your cars travel on 73.3 feet per second. We look at crash investigations not in miles per hour, but feet and seconds, because things go wrong in fractions of a second, not over hours and not over miles. Drivers have a very limited time to react. In fact, at 50 miles an hour, a car covers this distance in 8.59 seconds. 8.5 seconds. They're covering the distance where they can see a problem till they're on top of the intersection. If everything goes right, if a driver is paying attention and looking at that intersection as they come to the peak of the road, at 50 miles an hour, assuming no one's speeding on Kemper, which we know otherwise, at 50 miles an hour, they need 221 feet to observe, identify, decide, react, get on the brakes, get a mechanical response from the car, and stop the car. And if they're not paying attention, you have a T-bone crash, you have a dead child. Too many cars, too fast, not well planned. This plan does not allow for errors to be made from drivers. This plan saying we're going to bring more children into the neighborhood. That's scary. That's scary. You have children that will be walking on a sidewalk that we're hoping that we can get creative with the engineering on a 50-mile-an-hour street. And one thing to correct Mr. Kohler on, the intersection of Pippin and Kemper, there are not adequate crosswalks. There's one crosswalk going across Kemper on the east side. There is nothing on Pippin. That's absolutely inaccurate. In whole, the zoning change is going to cause severe financial and property distress to myself, my wife, my family. It hasn't been taken into account for. The increased housing, the increased density is going to cause problems. The proposed sidewalk, it can't be constructed the way. When we're talking about safety, creative engineering, hopes for creative engineering is not a good solution. The placement of this street, it's a poor placement. There are better choices than this. I request that this zoning change be denied in whole. I'm not against MI Homes building. The proposed houses they're planning are nice. Everything that I heard is that they're a reputable builder. They've got some smart engineers. They can make this work without it being this. They don't need to cut the property sizes down to 0.17 acres when it's zoned for something larger. They don't have to do this. They can make it work in the current rules. Make them play by the current rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flam. Audience, typically, we allow 5 minutes for a presentation, and I know you spoke much longer. And I was hesitant to interrupt you because I should have said that earlier. So, speakers yet to come up, please limit yourself, and we ask that you try not to repeat what has already been said by a previous.
With respect to public hearings, I know for council, for trustee meetings, there's a 5-minute limitation, but with respect to public hearings, I think the time limits should probably be kind of foregone, just to let them provide the input, as long as they're not repeating themselves and you know, as long as it's new information to provide. And I don't think that we should limit the public with respect to their input.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next person on the list is Sean Callan. If you'd state your name and spell your last name and give your address, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Sean Callan. My address is 225 West Court Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45202. I am an attorney at the Manley Burke Law Firm, and I'm here on behalf of Ken and Becky Pitcher, who reside at 12009 Pippin Road, which is, I'm trying to find my pointer here. Can't really see it on this drawing. And my laser pointer's not getting there, but it's up there in the upper northwest corner, right off to the northwest side. Yeah, up in that area, up in there. Now, Ken is going to speak to you as well. He's on the list. As an attorney, I just wanted to come and speak to you briefly about a couple of legal issues that I've seen both in the application procedure and in the application itself. And I will respect your rules because I don't have the factual information that these other residents do. But I do want to get these arguments out or these problems out so that we can preserve them going forward. May I approach the commissioners?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have just two exhibits. This is the first one. It's not together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
What I handed you is a two-page exhibit. The first page is the application for this proposal as originally submitted. And I've highlighted some areas on here that I want to discuss, but I would point out that if you see up in the upper right-hand corner, the first entry, there's a notation or an entry for date file. And it's typewritten 04/03/19. And when I first looked at this, I thought it was interesting because if you notice when the applicant signed, and this is the applicant, Mr. Austin, who we heard from, he signed on August 28th, 2019, and the property owner signed on August 27th, 2019. So all that really shows is that this document was likely prepared sometime in April, yet not filed until August. I later determined that during that summer, the zoning commission had actually instituted a text amendment to avoid applications like this going to the Rural Planning Commission. Applications like this used to go to Hamilton County Rural Planning, no longer. So it appeared to me, and this is just as an outsider looking at it, that the applicant delayed filing this until after your text amendment was passed. Be that as it may, this application was provided in response to a public records request filed by my client before our office even became involved. This particular copy of the application was provided by the Township Fiscal Officer. I was surprised when I saw the application that was provided to the commission in the staff packet. That application is on page 2 of the exhibit that I just handed to you. And I highlighted these same areas that I highlighted on page 1, because what's apparent is that on the application form that is before the commission that you are being requested to act upon, the case number ZA has been modified, The date filed has been modified. The zoning district designation that the existing zoning has been modified. And down at the bottom right-hand corner, the original application had a stamp received September 3rd, 2019, Colerain zoning. On the application form that you are reviewing, that stamp is missing. What is apparent to me from looking at this is that the fiscal officer provided us a copy of the application as filed. Somebody, over the course of these intervening months, modified or altered a public record of Colerain Township, resulting in the copy that you have before you in the zoning packet you received from the zoning office. So it's my contention that as you sit here today, you do not have a signed application for a zoning change that accurately depicts this development. You have something prior, you have something previous somewhere in the administration files, I would imagine, but the application before you was not signed by the applicant. It's an altered public record, and I would urge the commission not to act upon it. I'd urge the commission not to act upon it now rather than act upon it in future litigation ensues and then this all comes back up again. So I put this out here to give the commission an opportunity to consider this matter. You may decide it's meaningless. I think it's kind of important. We're looking at a public record that was modified. So that's my procedural issue with where we are in this case. I would also point out that as part of the zone change process, these applications are distributed to many different agencies. Just looking at some of them, Hamilton County Stormwater, Fire Department, Hamilton County GIS, Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District, ODOT, Hamilton County Engineer, and the Metropolitan Sewer District. All of those agencies got a copy of the application as filed. They all responded back in September. Those responses were not in response to the application actually before you today. So as you sit here today, you don't have any input from any of those agencies. You don't have the input to make this decision that you are being asked to make. And so again, I would urge you not to act on this application and send it back to start from the beginning. Now, that said, I do also have a couple of substantive ideas that I'd like to put in front of the commission if I could have just a couple more minutes of your time.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. What I've put together here is a series of exhibits, and I won't spend much time on this because a lot of people are here. But from a legal perspective, you know, how we as lawyers view the zoning process and how we view the actions of this commission. It doesn't sound like we have any real argument about this, but if you look at Exhibit A, the purpose of this is just to point out the statutory basis for zoning in a township. And we're all talking about it, but the zoning must be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. So in this case, there are several components of the Colerain Township Comprehensive Plan that bear on this application, this proposed development, and I just want to touch on a couple of them. The first is shown as Exhibit B. This has to do with roadway connection. Throughout the comprehensive plan, there is a repeated idea that cul-de-sacs should be avoided. Page 17, minimize cul-de-sacs. Page 20, minimize cul-de-sacs. Page 34, which is actually the land use plan specific to this particular area. This is the Beavis Pleasant Run development policy. No cul-de-sacs in this area per planning. Right? This isn't zoning, it's planning, so it's different. But the encouragement here is to have no cul-de-sacs in this area. I would also note that the planners envision pedestrian connectivity, including sidewalks and trails. We don't have this in this development, and Mr. Flam just explained how you're probably not going to have it. We look at Exhibit C, the comprehensive plan. Encourage us to look at density. Density for new development should be compatible with the density of existing development in the surrounding area. Now, we just took this photo. This is an aerial photo from Cages, and it shows the immediate surroundings. On this particular photograph, you can see Mr. Pitcher's house. It's a larger house up there in the northwest corner, right above where it says Beautiful Savior Lutheran School. But what you see, generally speaking, here is large lot rural development. You just don't see this kind of density in the immediate area. Now, of course, as pointed out by staff and also by MI in turning the page, if you step back from that and take a larger look at what the surroundings look like, well, of course, you have neighborhoods in that area. But if you look at the development pattern here, you had Kingsbridge in 1970 with small lots. You had Spruce Way in 1975 or so. Lots are getting larger. And then Hunterston in 1998, where you're looking at 14,000 square foot lot sizes, which is consistent with what the zoning is on this parcel now. So we're not looking at something ranging between 7,800 square feet and slightly bigger. It's a 14,000 square foot zone. And the history of the development in this area, moving to the west, is that the large lot zoning is retained. I would also point out that all of those neighborhoods were developed before planning. The comprehensive plan wasn't adopted until 2005. So you now have a situation where the planning document is telling us that this density is no longer supported. The developed projects that do support such a density all happen prior to comprehensive planning. So I guess the question as a township is, the planners told us something different. Do we want to keep repeating those kinds of mistakes? And this is just lot sizes, and as you can see from the picture one, we're talking about a rural area, right? This isn't about anything except how dense this property should be developed. Again, as Mr. Flam pointed out, no one here is saying you shouldn't develop this lot or this parcel, saying it shouldn't be developed in this way. Skipping ahead to Exhibit D, this deals with open spaces in the comprehensive plan. I thought this was very interesting. On page 20, the comprehensive plan, the planners, all the way back in 2005, noted residents have demonstrated a frustration with developments that receive incentives for development in return for the preservation of open space, when the open space is land that, because of development constraints, could not be developed for any use in the first place. And that's exactly what we have here. If you look at the aerial photograph I put on this page, the areas of open space is this hilly, tree-lined creek that runs completely around the property. There's no feasible way to develop that space in any event. So what's happening here is the developer is proposing to give you open space that can't really feasibly be developed anyway. And surely if we read this next provision where it says improvements could include walking or biking paths, playgrounds, or other uses, we don't see any of that on this plan. I mean, this plan is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. And it's not what the planners envisioned back in 2005. Quickly on to Exhibit E. This is from your zoning resolution. These are the criteria that the zoning commission would use in evaluating a plan like this and the proposed rezoning. First one, is the development plan consistent with the adopted Colerain Township land use plan and comprehensive plan? I submit that it is not, and I've laid out major reasons why I think that it is not consistent. Second criteria, the site will be accessible from public roads that are generally adequate to carry the traffic that will be imposed upon them. We don't know that. I'm going to point out something to the commission here in just a moment about traffic, but we don't know if these public roads are adequate to sustain this traffic. And then finally, the preliminary development plan has been transmitted to all other agencies and departments charged with responsibility for review. That did not happen. In this case, the applicant may have, or the township administration may have submitted an old plan, an old application to these agencies, but no one has submitted the modified plan. the altered plan, the altered public record. That has not been circulated. Now, on Exhibit F, I reprinted here the response of the Hamilton County engineer to the initial request for comment. The engineer noted the proposed development will generate additional traffic and congestion. The developer must therefore have a traffic impact analysis report prepared by a qualified traffic engineer. Now, I understand what the developers say. That's fine. Just give me my approval, and I'll go get that traffic report after the fact, before we get final development plan. Well, at that point, the horse is out of the barn. Zoning's been changed. Now we're just talking about little nits and gnats of exactly what that development's going to look like. This is traffic. It's a traffic concern. The Hamilton County engineer said, I don't care what plan you give me, it's a traffic concern. Personally, I think it's a little out of step for a developer to come in and demand a rezoning without providing that to the township for evaluation. It's a clear safety issue. It clearly falls within the purview of zoning. So I would encourage you at a minimum to not take action on this without a traffic study. And then the final exhibit is simply to demonstrate that this development is indeed within the 1 mile radius of the no bus service from the local schools, so these children will, as a matter of fact, be walking down that street to school. And that was all I had. I appreciate your time. Appreciate your attention. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Callen.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the list is Elena Lindner.
I have nothing further to add.
Okay. Mr. Ken Pitcher? You'd state your name, spell your last name, and your address, please.
Okay. Yeah, hi there. My name is Ken Pitcher, P-I-T-C-H-E-R. My address is 12009 Pippin Road, and I, as was Sean indicated, in the upper right-hand corner, where you see the lots that converge, there's 2 lots that fan out. That's the back of my property in the upper right-hand corner. All that vegetation you see is on my property over there. So that's just to give you a little bit of a frame of reference. And I just also want to just tell you that I've grown up in Colerain Township. I grew up on Crest Road, which is, as the crow flies from this property and from my property, is about a mile to the south. So I've grown up here, spent a little time away, but I've come back and I made a sizable investment in that property that I own right now. It's 8 acres. Used to be an apple orchard when I was a kid. And so we went up there and picked apples and so forth. And so I'm shaking your head so you know what I'm talking about. So I've been here this whole time. So the Slonaker Reserve, Bill Slonaker and Georgine Slonaker, Bill was my bus driver when I was a kid. So, I mean, I know how this whole area has been. I made a conscientious decision to come back and invest a lot of significant dollars in Colerain Township. We just voted through our school district levy, and so we're here to try to maintain our property values. So then going on with where I want to try to take this now, because I'm here to tell you as well, I am firmly against this rezoning. I would ask that you not vote to rezone this. I'm okay with MI Homes developing, but it needs to be within the context of the 14,000 square feet that is present right now. That was the Hunterston development. And I don't need to, I'm not against these more dense areas, except to the extent that they're going to create a problem. And the water problem is just one problem. There's going to be light pollution, noise pollution, and I am worried about the safety of these kids trying to get to school. It's just not feasible. But that being said, you know, put a little bit of context to this too. The Kings Bridge subdivision, that was built back in the 1970s when we had baby boomers. So there was a necessity to get a lot higher density. And as Sean was pointing out, spruce wood came out 5 or 6 years later, and it increased the size from the 8,500 to 11,000. Yeah. And then later we've gone to Hunterston, and it's because we don't need to change and vary from where we're at. I built and put a lot of money into my property on the basis that I could rely upon what our zoning and planning commission was doing. So anyway, and I want to continue to stay within those confines. So I came to understand about this plan from one of my neighbors actually, MI Homes apparently mailed something to me, and I don't doubt that they probably did, but I may have pitched it as thinking it was junk mail or something. But this notification of August 29th, you've seen that letter. And that letter is sort of, it kind of made me like, well, wait a second here. How feasible is this process that they're talking about attaining $325,000 to $350,000 average values? But I start out with the first paragraph, and I said, okay, well, they're going to be open and transparent and good neighbors, and that starts with letting us know about this development. Well, I think that's really not so much the true agenda as because they knew we would have this particular night coming down the road when these neighbors, myself included, would have an opportunity to address the commissioners about this particular zoning change. So I think there was a little bit non-genuine in the conversation there. And then the preliminary site plan was put in there about these homes being 1,500 to 3,000 square feet and getting prices in the $325,000 to $350,000. Well, that just kind of struck me as almost not doable. And so I said, okay, I'm not a real estate expert, so let me find out. So I asked some real estate people, including getting information from the multiple listing service. And Colerain East, which is the property which is east of Colerain Avenue, US 27, which is where we're at, I would submit to you that since 2010, there's been 5 homes that have sold for $300,000 or more. Now, Colerain West, west of 27, there's over 200 that have sold for over $300,000 since January 1st, 2015. So it makes me really think these small lots, and the ones that did sell in Colerain East, so we're looking at comparable apples to apples, one of them sold with 30-something acres, and the other one sold with 6.65 acres. And so I'm not to say that we don't have valuable property where we're at. It's just not that we're not seeing development, and I think that was, Mr. Kohler said that earlier, we haven't seen anything since the turndown in 2008. And that property that was going to go in there, the Slonaker Reserve, that fell apart just because of market conditions. So I say let MI develop this with market conditions in mind with the current zoning plan. I don't think this is attainable. I would worry from the standpoint of they get so far into this and they can't make the money that they need to make on this, and this gets dropped or abandoned. And then we've got this eyesore sitting there that doesn't do any good for any of us to have an undeveloped subdivision. So I would worry about that. But then after I found out about this, I made it a trip over here and I talked to Mike Iona, and I came out to actually view all the plans because I wanted to understand what was going on first. Because I looked at the letter from MI, and I thought, this is a bait and switch. They get my approval because I think they're going to have $325,000 to $350,000 homes, and that's not what this is going to end up being. So I came over and I saw Mike, and I was a little put off to begin with, I'm not going to deny, because I felt like this plan was being pushed down my throat. And he and I had words about it, and then we also kind of made up at the end of it and said, I said why I got a little bit disturbed with him, and he said, well, I'm just trying to, I want to do this. He was new to the job, so there's some exuberance. He's in, at that time was like a month into the job, so I know he's still fairly new at this. But because I questioned, do you even understand where this property is? Do you know this property? I mean, I ran this property as a kid, so I know this property left and right, and I know what's not doable. And I do take some offense with the way this is being portrayed as all this open space is usable. It's not. And that 15,743 square feet number, that's really erroneous. When you take, you're taking 8 acres, which is primarily stuck in one corner, and saying we're going to consider that as part of the density of the rest of this subdivision. It's just not being very genuine in the thought process. But anyway, so I'm looking at this, and he gave me his card, and it's zoning and planning. And so I'm thinking, okay, zoning and planning. I want my zoning and planning people to be looking out for all of us. And the planning side of this really sticks with me, because if anything is thrust upon MI as a result of we at Colerain Township are going to make them plant a few trees and other such amenities, I'm not buying that this is worth the trade-off to get this high density where we're gonna have all of these rooftops and we're gonna have all these driveways and all of these roadways that are gonna displace all that water. You saw the pictures. I've seen it myself firsthand, how much this water becomes a problem down over my neighbors' houses on the west side of this property. I'm not gonna rehash all that, but I'm simply saying that really is an issue. And so with respect to everything that Mike, Iona, and myself talked about, is I understand he wants to impose will to a certain extent in trying to influence this. But they're gonna have all these kids going to school. There is no sidewalks. There are no opportunities to get across Pippin Road. And I'm telling you, my wife's been rear-ended on Pippin Road right in front of our house. They regularly go 40, 45 miles an hour on a 35-mile-an-hour zone. So I fear for those kids. It's a very large intersection, all four corners. There's turn lanes, so it's at a minimum, it's a 3-lane, and usually because the berm sticks out further, it's usually about 4 lanes to get across. And I'm afraid those children crossing there are not going to be aware of what's going on, and I am afraid that the drivers who are regularly speeding through there are not going to pay enough heed to these kids. And I don't want to have a fatality and one of these children get hurt from my neighborhood. That's just, it just irritates me when we can take and try to do something to avoid that right now. So that's where I come out on this whole thing. And, you know, I look at some of the things. I went into MI Homes 2018 annual report this year, and their management is saying, before acquiring land, we complete an extensive comparative study and analyses which assist us in evaluating the economic feasibility of the land acquisition. And when I did my FOIA request, I never got anything other than a picture like that shows how this is being diagrammed out. Well, if they've done all of this, where is it? And then likewise, when my attorney, Sean, requested another subsequent request of all the information, which I had done back in October, we come up with this different application thing. So I start to question what is going on at my planning and zoning commission. I find that seems to be like there's some kind of improprieties there that I can't understand why it's happening, and I can't understand why this is being thrust upon me so hard, this development. I felt really very much taken aback because all I was doing was looking for answers to satisfy myself, to make a decision that was based on facts. And he came at me a little too hard. Like I said, we patched it up. I don't dislike him, but it's just a matter of I don't understand why that's happening. So I would respectfully request that you deny this zoning change. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Kevin Girth. Again, sir, if you would state your name, spell your last name, and your address, please.
My name's Kevin Girth. It's Gerth. I'm at 3140 West Kemper Road. My property is up to the top left corner. It's kind of behind the written part up at the top. I got a couple concerns also related to the traffic and stuff, that where the entrance to Abbeytown would be. We've all already talked about the sidewalks and the kids. My driveway is just to the west side of the entrance. Right now, we get a lot of traffic coming out of Hunterston from a west side, especially in the morning when I leave for work. There is a line of traffic. Putting the entrance on the other side of the neighborhood is going to give me just that much more traffic coming from the west now. People going to 27, going to work. When we come down that 50-mile-per-hour road, just to pull in our driveway, we get people impatient, not wanting to slow down to let us get in their driveways. They'll go on the other side of the road if they got to go around because they don't want to slow down. I see it just being one more safety issue as far as getting out of my driveway along with my neighbors to get out on the road. Another concern I got was we don't have city water run up to the house. We have a well. Our well is just to the west of where the retention ponds are. There's numerous springs that flow throughout that property. I imagine MI is aware of it when they drilled for their soil samples. When I rode along with the farmer this year harvesting the field, we checked out some of the holes. It was a very dry summer, and you can see down the holes, they're full of water. All the excavating, the development, the retention ponds, all the runoff, all that being located next to my well. Got concerns of the quality and quantity of my water. Not quite sure how it goes as far as developing on top of natural springs, but I know they're out there all throughout all the properties where they want to develop. I did have a question as far as the green space up at the top left corner of the proposed property. They want to leave that as a green space, but I think it's kind of up in the air as far as what's really going to happen with that. I know they, down at the lower end, where there's not much buffering right now, where the homes are right up against the fields, they're talking about trees, fence to, accompany those folks' needs. The green space, if it's left the way it is, I'm comfortable with it. If they're going to turn that green space into walking paths, clear it out, parks or whatnot, I will have an issue with it because that will, come right up against my property. Right now, it looks good without a fence. If they put parks, walking trails like that, I think a fence would also need to be a subject to conversation before any of that's gone through. So. And then I do have a paper from a man named Steve Yerke. He wasn't able to be here tonight. A lot of it, what he wanted to talk about was kind of already briefed up. One thing that I know hasn't been discussed or even mentioned, which MSD has already kind of approved the sewer coming out of the neighborhood, which goes to Mike's yard. There's an easement there. Everything's going to be filtered or ran through over to the Hunterson neighborhood. I'm not an engineer, but I know from neighbors over there in that neighborhood that there is a potential issue with the lift station, pump station for the
Sir,
sewers.
you've admitted you're not an engineer. This is outside the scope of what is actually applicable to this hearing.
I guess what
This is early in the process. MSD is addressed down the road.
Okay, I just wanted to make, there was no briefing on that as far as your presentation goes, as far as what you're proposing, your development, your plans. Didn't make sense to me when it wasn't mentioned. The sewer does go across my property. I understand the easement is there in place, but there was a lot of questions, I guess, that weren't mentioned or answered as far as size of the pipe that's there and what that lift station's actually capable of holding as far as developing a neighborhood of this size to a sewer that might not even be able to handle it. So back to what Ken was saying, don't want to start developing a big project and find out that it's all torn up and ain't going to happen. So just things I wanted to mention. So that's it.
Thank you, sir. I think it's Justin Lanham.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
I'm sorry?
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ryan Cage. Again, sir, if you'd state your name, spell your last name and your address, please.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Cage. My address is 3150 West Kemper Road. It's not directly adjacent to the proposed development, but actually slightly to the west of it, a little bit more, actually next to Kevin's address. I own the second private drive, actually directly west of the proposed development. So a little bit of background, I am an engineer by trade, chemical engineer, albeit, but an engineer nonetheless. So Some of the things that I had concerns about have already been covered, so I won't reiterate them. But mostly the concerns that I have revolve around the retention ponds and how they would be maintained. Due to my background in water treatment and drinking water applications. I'm not a civil engineer, obviously, so I can't speak to the topographical stuff, although there are concerns with the flooding affecting all the properties directly west of the proposed development. The quality of the drinking water, my house is also serviced by a well, no city water access. I have actually inquired about getting city water access, however, it is prohibitively expensive, roughly $20,000, I'd say, to get it back to my property. So with the flooding, there would be concerns with the quality of the water and the availability of the water. Other than that, I have no other concerns.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Scott Huber?
Good evening. My name is Scott Huber, Huber, Site Civil Engineer with Abercrombie & Associates, 8111 Cheviot Road, Suite 200, 45247, I believe it is. We moved recently. I'm representing the developer. I'm the Site Civil Engineer for the developer. So there was a lot of things discussed here in the open session, and I just want to try to address some of those while I have a chance here. Number one is regarding the drainage and the detention. I know several of you, you're veterans of the board, and I've been in front of you many times. I just want to bring you up to date on the drainage policy of Hamilton County and also Ohio EPA. Things have changed over the years recently, and I just wanted to update you on all that. As far as the Hamilton County regulations go, they've increased their maximum detention capacity to retain a 100-year storm, and it's actually a two-stage release. So their highest stage is to detain the 100-year storm and release a 10-year storm. So they're actually throttling that down. And the other stage is to detain a 10-year storm and release a 1-year event. So they throttle, when it rains a 10-year storm, our site is only going to release a 1-year storm. So they actually throttle that down. It's not like a 10 versus a 10. They actually, take a reduction on that. The new regulation that came into effect is through Ohio EPA, where they actually have detention requirements now, or it acts as detention. It's actually a water quality requirement that there's detention for a 1-inch rain event now. So Ohio EPA regulates that these water quality ponds, which will apply to this subdivision, that a 1-inch rainfall will actually be detained and released over a 48-hour period. So that's kind of a new regulation that has come into effect. It probably started in April of this year. So there is standard detention regulations that are going on that we have to adhere to. Regarding the flooding of the creek, I think somebody presented the packet. I don't know. I haven't seen any of the packets that you all received, but the culvert that is underneath the private driveway, just north of the Flam property, that's a 12-inch pipe. It's a 12-inch diameter pipe. It's plastic. Well, there's 50 acres that drain through there right now today. There's 50 acres of runoff that hits that 12-inch pipe. So that pipe is vastly undersized. So again, I haven't seen any of the photos, but if they're saying there's flooding there now, I believe it. I absolutely 100% believe it 100% because that pipe is vastly undersized. The pipe system that goes into Hunterston subdivision that's on immediately to the west, that upstream pipe is a 42-inch diameter pipe. So that's really the size that's needed. You're probably talking in the range of a 36-inch to a 42-inch pipe that's really needed to carry that 50 acres of drainage, and there's a 12-inch in there. So, it's flooding now. I'm not going to make it worse because it's already flooding. So I don't know what to say to that. I don't know that there is an answer because there's already a problem. The county, like I said, the county has detention requirements. We're going to adhere to it. The Ohio EPA has water quality requirements. We're going to adhere to those. There is a throttling down of the storms, but there's really nothing I can do with an undersized pipe that's off of my property. The other thing that I'd like to discuss is regarding the application and I don't know, the misinformation or timing or whatever that the attorney was talking about for the application. You know, this project was originally scheduled to be on last month's zoning agenda, and it got pushed back to this month. And that's because we made a mistake on the application. We originally submitted the application, we just had it listed as an R4 zone, and it's really an R4 and an R6. So that's why there was another application was submitted, is because we wanted to cover all our bases, and we added the R6 zoning designation because we missed it the first time. And I think that's why it was even tabled a month to come to this month. We were supposed to be doing it last month. So there's no conspiracy theory here. We made a mistake, all right? I mean, it's just as simple as that. The other thing is that we are going to be doing a traffic impact study. That is a requirement. We don't have it yet. You guys know, I mean, we have to start somewhere. We can't design the whole subdivision and then come in here and ask for zoning approval. That doesn't make sense to do that. So we know that we have to have a traffic impact study. The sidewalk safety will be a part of that study. And, we heard all the discussions about the safety issues and that, and we'll take all that into consideration. So the only other thing is that I want to leave you with is that, there's a lot of discussion about just going and doing a straight zone and doing a regular R4 and R6 zoning. And I hope you guys realize this. I think you do because you're all been around a while. But, going through this process, you have the ability to put these conditions on here with the house siding and the architectural standards and the landscaping and all that. And it may not seem like much, but really it's a big deal. I mean, because otherwise, if we just did straight zoning, we could come in here and, as of right, not do what we want, but there's regulations that we have to do, but we wouldn't have all these extra conditions, that you're putting onto, and that actually the developers agreed to. I mean, just agreed to most of them. So that's all I have, and I can answer any other questions that you might have, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Don Smith.
Good evening, Commissioners. Don Smith, SMITH, live at 12080 Birch Hill Drive. Just for the record, as you look at the diagram there, we are the property that borders on the north side to the west. There's two properties there. My neighbor, who could not be here tonight. In between that, and that's alluded to in the application, is what's called the panhandle. I wanted to address that a little bit. I'm here because my neighbor, Mr. Girth, kindly came over and told me Sunday night that there was going to be a hearing. I had no idea that any of this was even contemplated, and so I'm a little bit chagrined of what the proposed solution is imposed upon me or my neighbor to try to deal with this piece of land. And now it brings up the question, as I've listened to the presentations of others, that you now have something that was, as a matter of oversight, brought up and added into this, that let's deal with the panhandle, that we can't sell it, so let's just amend it to another property without ever having this brought up. I've never received the letter. I have no idea that this was going on at all tonight, so I'm a little bit behind the power curve on this. My background is in physics, advanced, and also I'm a systems engineer. So I have an approach of looking at things with a not just one or two aspects, but all of the aspects and how they fit together. The thing that resonates with me, just very briefly, is having lived down in the Houston area for about a dozen years. We lived on a .17 or 19 acre parcel, and that the water problems that we have down there were tremendous. Again, you get a lot more water off the Gulf, but nevertheless, the flooding in the local area was tremendous, and they have tremendous retention ponds down there to try to handle this, but it gets overwhelmed. The problem I see here is as you develop this, you pave it, you put houses on there, you've taken away all of the natural drainage out of this thing, and now you're trying to collect water and run it down, as my neighbors have stated clearly, that you're trying to engineer a solution that may or may not work. No one knows until they get not the 1 inch rain, but the 6 inch rain, or a remnants of a hurricane coming up. These are the types of issues that happen quite frequently. The other thing that speaks to me that I haven't heard anybody talk about is profit motive. There's a tremendous amount of revenue to be made by MI Homes, and I have nothing against MI Homes. I don't even know who they are. But what I see is changing this to add in houses that are, I can't fathom what they're going to do inside, maybe gold plating or something. Our house of 2,500 square feet in Houston was very, very nice. And we sold it for we listed it for 270. I can't imagine the additional improvements that they would have to make to these homes to be able to charge a price of $300,000 to $350,000 in a more rural setting with these postage stamp size lots. I have a hard time understanding that, other than through it's an opportunity to compress, increase the density, and then also take what they get, and hopefully no problems will pop up in the aftermath of what they've done. But we've heard about the children's safety. It's something my wife had a very big concern about. My other concern that I have, and Mr. Girth also mentioned that a little bit, was it's unspecified what they're going to do in the green areas. Well, we'll figure it out afterwards. Well, again, as my other neighbors have said, they haven't made an investment in the property. They've put in significant fiscal and financial resources to try to make this work and try to have something that they want to enjoy. I'm fully open to a normal development, but trying to shove all of this into this one area and make it fit is a little bit, I think, over the top for what I've seen. My neighbors have all addressed the other various concerns that I have, so I won't rehash them, so I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Calvin and Kathy Hunter. You're fine.
My name is Calvin Hunter. I live at 3220 West Kemper, just to the west of the private property owners that abut the Abbeytown. I might say I was not born on the place, but I grew up in my whole life there. My grandfather farmed the Hunterston property, which is now home to about 185 homes. I'd like to state that I am against the zoning change. The original Hunterston property that Trees developed was slated for a similar zoning request change, which would allow 285 homes in the Hunterston subdivision. That was highly protested by the neighborhood. It was also changed to an R4 zoning by the Colerain Zoning Commission. They did not allow the high density zoning change that was requested. So I am definitely against it for the sake of my neighbors, and most of them moved to that part of the county in the township for open farmland. You could see deer everywhere. You could see we have a lot of wild turkeys. We have a lot of coyotes now, which people are complaining about, but that helps keep the geese population down a little bit. My biggest concerns are the sewage treatment plant or the sewage lift station. I don't know if the MI and Abercrombie Group are aware that that is merely a lift station that pumps all the sewage from Hunterston up diagonally through that property to the corner of John Gray Road, and it becomes part of the Mill Creek collection. That pumping station was upgraded once just to meet the standards for Hunterston property owners. So I don't know whether that lift station is adequate for another 85 homes, or whatever the total is. Is that right? 80, 85? But that's an issue. The other issue is for my neighbors to the east with their private homes. They have drinking water potable water wells to provide their water. The sewer line has to come through their property somewhere. At least 2 or 3 neighbors will be faced with a decision. And according to the Cincinnati Metropolitan Sewer District, item 3, it says private sanitary sewer easements with the right of entry and maintenance may be required for all portions of the proposed building sewer that will transverse existing or subdivided parcels other than the one being serviced, which is Abbeytown. Recorded copies of the executed easements and the revised deeds for those property owners must be referenced, blah, 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 et cetera. Anyway, so there's an easement that has to be granted to those people that had, originally it was like 10-acre plots and just to the east of Hunterston. I'm not sure what the, Mr. Flam and some of the other people that spoke ahead of me, but you know, that acreage has been brought down a little bit, but there's no less than 5 acres, I think, in any of those private homes right there to the east or to the west of Abbeytown. My other concern is, again, the safety, which has been highly discussed very well. I believe there have been quite a number of accidents on the Hunter Green exit from Hunterston Subdivision. And if I recall, there may have been one fatality just coming out of the Hunter Green Drive. The egress is very clear. You can see down the road toward Germania. You can see all the way up the road to the top of the hill, but yet there's been numerous accidents there. And there was like a memorial wreath or something across on the fence opposite the Hunter Green exit there. So again, safety concerns. Let's see. I've personally witnessed the flooding between my neighbors. We're the first house on Hunterston as you're coming down the hill going west. And we've witnessed flooding across the private drive behind us. And that 40-inch or 42-inch drain line has an overflow, and the water is actually just from the natural land absorption has flooded several times in the 15 years, 20 years since Hunterston has been built. Originally, that was a creek through there, and still remains as a natural creek, I believe. But adding, as number of people have alluded to or spoken to, you've paved over, you've put houses at a density that is going to really tax any kind of a retention pond. I don't know, the details of that. I'm an electrical engineer, not a civil engineer, so I'll leave that to the experts. The other question for my neighbors' sake is, will they be assessed sidewalks? sidewalks cost money for the private ownership between Hunterston and Abbeytown. Usually there's an assessment for that. They also have septic systems, I believe, for all of those properties. Will they be required to tie in to the MSD line that runs down through their property? So that's a question that I have also for the zoning commission. There's a lot of issues that have been just kind of glanced over. So that's really all I have. Any questions for me?
Thank you, sir. Okay, Gloria R.
Hi, my name is Gloria R. It's spelled A-H-R. It's pronounced R. 3110 West Kemper Road.
Pull the mic down, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Did you hear me okay?
Yeah, we just want to make sure it's being picked up by the recorders.
Okay. I guess it's okay. Okay, so there's a lot of engineers around. I'm a domestic engineer, but I'm a little concerned. I'm wondering if this gets developed, is there any way that we can move the entrance? My house is right, here's the entrance, and my house is right here. Okay, so could they move it up by the fire station? For one thing, people wouldn't be flying down the hill. We've had no less than 5 times since I've lived there, and we've been there since 2005, but at least 5 times, cars have lost control coming down the hill, and it's not always ice or wet or anything. They come down the hill and they taken out our mailboxes 3 times. There's 3 mailboxes in a row, gone. And it's really concerning to me because they end up in my yard. Luckily, my house sits back, but I have a dog, I have grandchildren. We can't let them in the front yard at all because you never know when and they're not necessarily drunk or anything, they're just preoccupied or whatever. So my big concern is that if they could, is there any way they can move that up to the fire station, the entrance?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And that would be it.
Okay. Thank you. We have completed all the names on the list, so therefore I would recommend or ask for a motion to close public hearing.
So moved. I'll second it.
If we could have a roll call, please, Mr. Banza.
Mr. Faring?
Yes.
Ms. McMullen?
Yes.
Excuse me. Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Westfall? Mr. Grady?
Yes. We have heard all of the information from staff and applicant and concerned citizens. Commissioners, it's now our opportunity to ask questions of whomever. If you have questions for specific persons, please address them to them, and let's see what we
Mr. Chair,
find out.
before you ask any questions, can I just make a couple clarifications on some things that were asked from the audience?
Sure.
And presented. As far as the legal notice, there was a clerical error with the initial application. Staff did catch that. We talked to the applicant. They were also submitting some additional information at the time. So we consulted our legal counsel, and we did renotice the hearing, which is why we pushed the hearing back to this month in accordance with all bylaws and ORC statutes. There is no, per our legal counsel, there is no issue with action being taken as far as recommendations on this application. There was a clerical issue, and it was something that we caught, and we had the applicant change it, and we renoticed it. As far as, I think, Mr. Smith, you had said that you did not receive notice. I just wanted to clarify that we did send out, are you on Birch Hill Drive, 12080?
That's correct.
Okay, we did send out
That's not the listed mailing address, though. We have a P.O. box.
Okay.
It's listed in our public records.
Okay, I do apologize. I mean, that we do, is it the applicant that provides those here, or do we provide those?
It's the mailing address for the property.
So the mailing address for the property that we have on file is that address. Just to clarify that for the record. I heard that the Hunterston subdivision was turned down for a PDR and that it's actually R4. the Hunterston subdivision actually is a planned development residential zone. So it was approved for PDR at some point. I'm not sure as to what was being referenced there, but the current zoning of the Hunterston subdivision is PDR. And then as far as assessment for adjacent sidewalks, there's no current proposal right now, or any that staff is aware of in the future, to assess any property owners on either side of the subdivision for sidewalk improvements. And then as it pertains to questions related to the tie-in requirement for MSD, the township does not control any of that. That's an MSD regulation. The township does not force or not force people to tie into a sewer. So just wanted to provide those clarifications moving forward.
If I may clarify, Mr. Iona, on the sidewalk, the Hunterston has it.
Correct.
Then it stops where the private property, those 3 or 4 houses back there.
Correct.
So with this development, we'd have sidewalk, gap, and then sidewalk.
Yes.
Until some future point that sidewalks are put in there.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, commissioners, floor is open.
I want to clear some things up, because the amount of houses have been bounced around. I want to clarify that. Right now, you are asking for, the proposed would be for 68 homes, is that correct? That would be under the new PDR.
That's correct.
And also on the other paperwork, we have R4 and R6 existing.
Correct.
Right now. Under the existing R4, and this is probably a question for Abercrombie's office, under the existing R4 and R6, we don't touch this, that would be Hamilton County. How many homes would be allowed to be put on that property?
Well, I don't know the exact answer, but I can talk about that in terms of density.
Yeah.
So, under an R4 zone, the minimum lot size is 14,000 square feet, okay? And that's per house. So if you convert that, you get a density of a little over 3 units per acre for an R4. So it's 3 homes per acre is basically how that works out if you put it on a unit acreage. Our proposal was 68 lots divided by the 28.93 acres, which is the net area after we dedicate right-of-way. We're at 2.35 acres per lot. So our density is less than an R4. So I hope that answers your question, but in my opinion, our development is less dense than an R4 zone based on density. Now, I know everybody's talking about the lot sizes and this, that, and the other, but just because the lot sizes are smaller doesn't mean that we're cramming more lots in there. Right. Because we have less, the density is lower. So we have it's less density.
How about with R6?
I don't have that information in front of me, but an R6 is a smaller lot size than an R4 just in general.
It is, and a very small portion of the site in question is actually zoned R6. It's a very small portion on the east side of the site.
So for an R6, the density would be even greater. You know, you might be maybe close to 4, or I don't know, I'm guessing really, to be honest with you. It's greater than 3.
Mm-hmm. So even under the R4, if we weren't to require the 20% or what we have for green space, a developer could go in there, cut that up the way they want under the Hamilton County specs, and get actually more homes on that property than what the 68 is.
Yes, there is no open space requirement. If we were to do a straight R4, there is no open space requirement. and our density could increase, yes.
But the size of but the frontage of the lots would be larger, right, through the county? Your frontage?
Yeah, we'd have to meet whatever the R4 lot sizes are and what the setbacks are and the frontage and all that, yes.
So basically longer roads and less green space left, or reserve area.
Under an R4, you have longer roads, less green space, right? And again, like I said earlier in my comments, all of your conditions that you have about buffering, architectural standards, street trees, minimum house sizes, basements, none of that would apply in an R4.
Does that mean that you would not be doing that, though? If you stuck with the R4, would you not be doing things such as the bufferings and the sidewalks and?
I think the point is, it's just not a requirement. It just gives you some latitude to make some shape the development.
We probably definitely wouldn't buffer because we're buffering like, you don't buffer like uses. Usually you buffer like you have a commercial zone next to a residential zone, so you have buffering. But when you have residential bordering residential, there's really no buffering. And so we wouldn't do any buffering if we went to a straight R4. And that's not a threat or anything, that's just the fact. I mean, we're adding to the project by doing the buffering, because normally you wouldn't buffer like uses. Residential use to residential use, you wouldn't provide any buffering.
Right. The reason that I ask is because the residents have stated that MI Homes sent a letter to them stating that they wanted to be a good neighbor, knowing that that's something that the neighbors want. If you don't get the proper zoning that you want, are you moving backwards into not wanting to accommodate some of the things that the neighbors are asking for?
Well, I think that's what they did. I mean, MI Homes has been working with staff, frequently with the landscape plan. I think there's been several iterations. It's not just that we presented a plan and that was it. You guys went back and forth a couple times and tried to hash out the landscape plan that you see. So, I mean, they're making an effort right now to be a good neighbor and to provide this buffering and the fencing and, the things that we've talked about. But in an R4, I mean, they're not obligated to do any of that.
Oh gosh, that's way at the end. Let's go to it. Question is, 3 units to the acre, and we're almost 30 acres, that's 90 homes. There you go. Essentially what we've done is we've saved the natural features. We have almost 30% green space. And so what we've done is take the square footage out of the lot and left it for the common areas to protect nature, for all the residents to enjoy it. And so that's the trade-off. We're reducing density, we're reducing lot size, and adding 30% green space back. And quite frankly, provide some buffer to some of the neighbors. That's the plan design, modern.
In the green space buffering that we're providing, the requirement is 20%, and we're providing 30, almost 30%, like 29%. So I mean, we're even above and beyond, the regulation of open space requirement with what we're providing.
Mr. Chairman, I have an objection to something Mr. Austin just said. I just want to put it on the record.
I cannot hear you, sir.
May I speak?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I have an objection to something Mr. Austin just said, and I just wanted to put it on the record. He said at 3 lots per acre, 30 acres, it could do 90 homes on this site. That's just not true. I mean, you got to have streets. You got to have some way to get around in there. It's not going to be 30 acres of developable space. So I mean, that's just a mischaracterization that's put out there. I was supposed to influence the commission. I just want to be sure we understand that is not true. Thank you.
Commissioners, other questions?
I have a question. I've heard several residents speak of flooding and water concerns. What's being done to address that?
You're meaning what's being done now to
What
address
will be
that?
done to address that?
I think she's talking to the builders, if I'm not mistaken.
The homeowners.
Builders.
Like I stated in my statements earlier, we are providing detention. There's 2 detention ponds shown on the plan. They're going to follow the Hamilton County rules and regulations. We are providing the water quality that's required by EPA. But as far as the undersized pipe that's on somebody else's property, I mean, we're not allowed to go on somebody else's property and improve it. So that's, you know, it's out of my control. I guess
Just add that the stormwater management is regulated by Hamilton County Engineer's Office.
Exactly.
Not regulated as a zoning matter.
The only thing in front of the commission is just the criteria that's set forth in section 4.5.3 that lists the 7 criteria that should be taken into consideration with respect to the preliminary plan development that's been put forth tonight.
Do we need to read that into the record?
If you want to read it, we can read that. You know, we can provide them copies of it. I mean, they should have.
Then, staff, can you clarify for me? First of all, Mr. Hubert, clarify the difference between a detention and a retention. That word's been synonymously stamped.
And I was probably sloppy with it myself. My apologies. These are going to be retention ponds, so they're going to be wet. They're always going to have water in them.
Okay.
Detention is basically a hole that's dry. It fills up when it rains and then it drains out. These are going to be wet ponds. You're always going to see water, but it will still provide the required volume, you know, for during the storm event. But when the storm's over, you're still going to see water. It's still going to be a wet pond. So that's why it's a retention pond. And that was my mistake. My apologies.
Now, if you will, as this develops further, assuming this gets passed tonight or what have you, and it moves on, somebody designs those retention basins and so on and so forth, who is concerned about where that water goes after it leaves the basin? Who addresses that?
I am. I'm concerned about it. I mean, just because.
But who addresses where it goes?
Who regulates it, or who would comment on it, or something?
You're planning to eventually get this built, incorporate what's going to happen to that water once it leaves the retention basin.
I will analyze what happens with the ponds during the rain events, and I will look at the downstream situation, and I'll know what happens to it. But if there's still a problem, I mean, I can't go in there and fix it. I can't go on his property. It's private property. I can't go on his property and fix it. But I'll know what's going on. I mean, I would assume, just off the top of my head, there's going to be a slight improvement. But for me to say that, I'm going to guarantee that it's never going to flood, I mean, it floods now. So, I mean, how can it be worse? I can't make it worse. How can it be worse? You know? So.
Hey, add to that.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate this opportunity. What he said so far is we have an inadequate pipe down there. Whether you put a 48-inch pipe down there or a 12-inch pipe, the water's coming above the driveway. Okay, are you going to dig out the entire subdivision and run it into the new subdivision? No, they're not. He said it himself. He can't do a thing about it. Okay, he can't make it better, but he can make it worse. No one said that he's not going to make it worse. You know, this density, if MI Homes wants to do the right thing, they can build this neighborhood within the R8 or the R4 restrictions. They can still build a neighborhood like this with the buffering, if they really want to do what's right.
Sir, this has been, you stated this in your, the public hearing has been closed, and you addressed.
It's addressing the water issue.
Okay.
They're
Please stay
saying
on
that they
topic.
can do this. They can live with the current rules. He can't fix my water, but he can add to it. Thank you.
If I may, zoning resolution has some approval criteria, and I just want to run through those real quick. I think we've covered the basis, but I just want to run through these individually. The first is that the planned district and preliminary development plans are consistent with the adopted Colerain Township Land Use Plan and Colerain Township Comprehensive Plan. Those are actually one and the same. Calls for single-family residential, basically, for this area. Second, the proposed uses will have a beneficial effect on the community. Again, comprehensive plan calls for single-family residential. Third, the internal streets and primary and secondary roads are proposed properly interconnected with the surrounding and existing road network. We do have a street stubbed to the east for a future connection plus Kemper Road. There are no other possible connections surrounding this. Number 4, the site will be accessible from public roads that are I read that. No, that was the internal streets. Will be accessible from public roads that are generally adequate to carry traffic imposed on them. The proposed development streets and driveways will be adequate to serve the residents and occupants of the proposed development. Again, these are intended to be public streets, built to public street standards. The county engineer has standards for what a public street is supposed to look like, and that is what they are proposing. Number 5, the minimum common open space area has been designated and shall be transferred to a legally established homeowners association where applicable. That is what they're proposing to do. They're required to have a minimum 20%. They're around 30%, so they have actually more open space than required. The preliminary development plan is consistent with the intent and purpose of this resolution, in particular in the furtherance of the purpose of the planned district as set forth in 9.3.1. I went through that purpose statement at the very beginning of the presentation, things like efficiency and design and providing adequate benefits to the residents. And lastly, the preliminary development plan has been transmitted to other agencies and departments charged with the responsibility for review, and we have done that. We've sent it to that whole gamut of county and state agencies for review. So that's the 7 criteria that we cover in the course of our review.
Taken into consideration by the board.
Okay. Commissioners, other questions, information you want to add, or discussion among ourselves? Hearing none, then I will ask the commissioners if someone is ready to make a motion regarding this matter that is before us with ZA 2019-06 Abbeytown Subdivision, a zone map amendment. If someone's prepared to make that motion, please do so.
I make a motion that we accept the ZA 2019-06 Abbeytown subdivision as it is stated in with the conditions that are stated in the plan.
Before I ask for a second, may I clarify, Mr. Westfall, that you're making a motion to accept this as presented by the staff?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Do we have a second to that?
I'll second that.
Can I make a clarification on two of those conditions?
Yes, sir.
Because of the way that they're stated in the report. The one pertaining to the fence is on the western property line, is that's a number 8?
5.
5. Yes. That fence only be to the extent of where we're showing landscape buffering, not the entire length. And then the second one pertains to condition number 12 regarding the panhandle. That our suggestion is that if there's something other than transferring it to an adjacent property owner that addresses the long-term care and maintenance of that property, that does need to be addressed as part of this, because it is a part of the current tract.
And then also that number 6, the typo that I had sent, that was addressed in the final?
Yes.
Okay,
We actually changed that on our presentation slide.
thank you.
Okay, Mr. Westfall, I will come back to you. Hearing the two statements that Mr. Kaler made, does that move you to change your motion in any way?
No.
Okay, so the motion does stand. Okay, commissioners, any further discussion or questions you want to ask of anyone? Hearing none, then I will ask Mr. Urbanzik if you will call the roll.
Mr. Faring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
No.
Mrs. Smith,
No?
Mr. Westfall,
No.
Mr. Grody.
No. So the motion does not carry. So, Mr. Solman or staff, can you advise us where it goes from here, or what have
It's
you?
been denied, so.
It's denied, so the applicant can resubmit it at some future date in a different format or something.
Certainly,
Is that correct?
yes.
Okay.
It would have to be an amended application, and the components would have to change.
Okay. Again, we thank everybody for coming this evening, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you have not had dinner like some of us, you're going to scoot out. Okay, item number 6, we still have a meeting going on. Please, if you could leave quietly if you're leaving. Item number 6, or informal concept review, Mr. Kaler.
Pardon?
Anything on item number 6?
No, we have nothing.
Item number 7?
No.
8?
No.
9?
No.
10?
What is 10? I'm sorry.
Announcements?
No, we don't.
Okay. Commissioners, anything that you would like to ask or bring to the attention of staff?
No.
Do we have any positions coming open on the board?
We do. We are currently in the process of reviewing or interviewing applicants, and we'll have more updates that will be sent out to you all via email
Okay.
shortly.
How
So we've
many-
got 4 applicants this month, and we'll send up who we think is best.
But how many, I guess I didn't ask you probably, how many of us are our terms expired?
I think just one of you. It's Mr. Westfall, and he's reapplied. So we'll probably refill that position, and then we have some alternates to fill. So again, we'll provide a full update via email as soon as we get information on that, okay?
Thank you. Next meeting is December 17th. Do we have anything on the agenda so far?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second that.
And can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Faring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Aye.
Mr.
Yes. We stand adjourned at approximately 8:22.